Welcome to the Stuck Mic AvCast. My name is Carl Valeri, and I have a really special podcast today. Did you know the International Committee of the Red Cross runs one of the most complex humanitarian flight operations in the world? Today we have a special guest from the ICRC, that's the International Committee of the Red Cross, head of air operations, and that's Laurent Camissa, to describe the life-saving and humanitarian efforts of the ICRC, and specifically their flight operations. Laurent, welcome to the show from Geneva, Switzerland, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you.
I'm very excited to have you on today. Aviation touches so many lives in this world, and I'm with the Red Cross, American Red Cross, and I'm learning more and more about their missions. And one of the parts of the missions I did not know about was their actual aviation mission. But before we talk about that, first of all, what is the International Council of the Red Cross?
So what we refer to as the ICRC, in fact, the International Committee of the Red Cross, is this humanitarian organization. It was basically founded in 1863 by a guy called Henri Dunant, who basically realized after walking through a war field that there were a lot of distressed people and no one was basically coming and bringing any assistance to these people. So he decided to create this organization whereby it would be a neutral organization, not taking sides, whether who was fighting against who, and then they would just basically come up and bring in assistance to alleviate basically suffering for the people that were injured. And from there, of course, the ICRC has gotten much bigger. It's quite a big organization at the moment, one of the biggest humanitarian organizations. And to give you a quick idea, like we operate in over 90 countries in the world right now. We have different programs. Of course, many people understand them as being medical assistance, but there's also protection departments where we go to visit prisoners in prisons and so on. We do family reunification, families that would have been separated during conflict and so on. So we try to reconnect them with their siblings and so on. So there's a variety of things that the ICRC does nowadays. And so quite a few thousand of employees, and of course there's an aviation aspect to it, which is what we're here to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's so much that is being done and out in the world and that we don't know about. And a lot of times we see them and we don't know what they are. And you'll see a big red cross on the side of a vehicle, an aircraft, etc. But let's definitely talk about aircraft because, of course, we love to hear about airplanes. And by the way, if you're listening to this, you need to check out on the YouTube our video because behind Laurent is this really cool painting of an aircraft or picture of an aircraft. It's phenomenal. So tell us a little bit about the aviation division of ICRC, and then tell us about the painting behind you too. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, no, sure, very good. So the aviation, assistance, if I can put it this way, for the ICRC, sort of started happening after the Second World War, and it really sort of took off during the Nigerian Civil War, which is renowned or known as the Biafran War. And during that time, we basically started to do a lot of airlifts using DC-3 aircrafts. And there was a recognition at the time that the only way basically to bring in goods from one location to the other location, because access by road was not secure, it was by air. And then from there, it really, the aviation, assistance has really started developing throughout the years. Nowadays, where we stand at ICRC, we've been operating aircrafts continuously, I would say, for close to about 30 years, using helicopters and, of course, fixed-wing aircrafts. And at the moment, we have long-term contract agreements with 15 different air assets. That includes fixed-wing aircrafts and also helicopters, and we operate in 10 different countries. So of course, our operations vary from year to year. Sometimes you have more conflicts, sometimes you have less conflict. Sometimes we have more funded money to be able to provide air assistance and so on. So it fluctuates a lot throughout the years in terms of operational. But right now, where we stand, yes, it's 15 aircrafts, 10 different countries where we operate, and we do see that having aircrafts and helicopters is a must in some of the contexts where we operate.
So the aircraft that you operate, and just so people understand, the majority are like on a lease or on an agreement. Do you actually own any of the aircraft?
No, so it's not a standard practice in the humanitarian organizations to own aircrafts. So some of our, I wouldn't really call them competitors, but people that we collaborate with is also WFP World Food Program. They have a branch called UNHAS, which stands for United Nations Humanitarian Air Services. And they also have a bit of a similar program as we do, whereby we contract aircrafts. So what we will do is we will basically launch tenders, and there are a few companies that, their specialty is basically to provide air assets for humanitarian organizations. And then what we want is we basically want to have a bit of a turnkey solution. So what I mean by turnkey is that we go into ACMI contracts, which basically stands for aircraft crew, maintenance, and insurance. So the operators will basically provide us with the aircraft, with the crew, with the insurance, with all the maintenance necessary to ensure the aircraft is in good order. And basically what we do is we just pay for that service. Of course, we have to have an agreement with them. So typical agreements would be on an hourly cost. So we would say, for example, we would like to have a 50-hour contract with operator A, for instance, and then they provide us with the aircraft, the crew, insurance, maintenance, and then we just pay them. So irrespective whether we fly 10 hours or if we fly 50 hours, we will pay them the same amount, and they provide us this turnkey solution for the ICRC. Now, we still are responsible for that plane in the sense that as being the charterer, ICRC is chartering these aircrafts. We have an operational control of these airplanes. So we decide what we will put on board the aircraft. We decide how many passengers we will put on the aircraft. We will do the flight planning, at least give an idea of the route that we would like the operator to operate. And then, of course, the operator has its own operating room where they have their own set of dispatchers, of maintenance engineers, and so on. So they will do all the necessary planning that they will then give out to the pilots in terms of flight plan and how much fuel they require and so on. But we are there to give them a general idea of what we want, and then they will take over, and then they basically provide us with the service that we require from them.
This episode is sponsored by Pilot Council, LLC. You can find them at pilotcouncil.com. Pilot Council is an aviation law firm assisting pilots, aircraft owners, and other aviation professionals. You can find them on the web at pilotcouncil.com. Pilot Council sponsorship does not constitute legal advice or client-attorney relationship. Prior results do not guarantee similar outcomes. Interestingly, ACMI is common throughout the world, not just in the humanitarian world, it's also throughout the world. So this is not an uncommon practice. So you actually have a lot of experience in this in a previous life, talking about how to coordinate. Because this, to me, when you're describing this, it seems like it's a lot of coordination between, we have to get point A to point B with certain product, services, or people. How do you do that? How do you coordinate all that with the company that you're working with?
Well, I would say most of the companies that are under contract with us have a relatively good experience in operating in difficult contexts. So if you think South Sudan, Central Africa, Nigeria, for instance, and remote locations where you have small airstrips. So the first thing to understand is that most of these operators have experience in these contexts, so they're not unfamiliar with that. Now, the way that the coordination happens is, of course, we have a specific mission in a given country, and then what we will basically do is we will sit down with the operator. We will let them know, okay, if we take the example of South Sudan, for instance, we may have 30 to 40 different locations where we may be susceptible to operate. And then what we will do is we will share with the operator our flight planning. We will let them know tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, we intend to fly to these locations. So most of these locations, again, are locations that the operators would have been familiar with. And then we would basically agree that we can or they can indeed operate to these locations, providing that we have so many number of passengers, we have so much cargo, and so on. Um, I think one side note to mention is that all of our AirOps managers, so we have AirOps managers in all these 10 countries where we operate, they all have an aviation background. So when we talk to these operators, we talk the same language. If we talk about payload, if we talk about aircraft limitations or airfield limitations and so on, we have that understanding. So basically, when it comes to the need to discuss the planning of a mission that we will be doing, we will do that with the operators. So typically with the one of the pilots, or would be the flight dispatch team, and we will share information with them that we believe makes sense. Of course, if they have doubts, if they believe that we may have planned a flight with too many passengers that would, perhaps exceed the maximum takeoff weight of an aircraft, then of course we would readjust our planning. But there's always this close collaboration with the flight crew mainly and the ops department to make sure that whatever we're planning makes sense. Now, we also have standard operating procedures at the ICRC. So in each context where we operate, we have a guide, and we share that SOP with the operator so they know that, hey, those are the 30 different locations where we're susceptible to operate. And then the operator would, of course, have what we call a jungle JEPs. So we all know about the Jefferson, charts that, Jefferson is issuing, but we have in this industry what we call jungle JEPs. So it's basically approach plates for airports or airfields that are not necessarily recognized, and then on those little jungle jets they have the same information that Jefferson would have, so airfield length, obstacles, frequencies, elevation, and so on. So with all this information, they know where we want to go. They have those jungle jets with the destinations where we intend to send them. We have this mutual discussion ahead of the actual flights happening. And then if everyone agrees, then we just, then they do their necessary work in doing their flight planning. And off we go the next day or the 2 days or the following week. That's basically how it works.
Talking about these jungle jeps, and obviously this is different than Jeppesen, so we don't get in trouble there on the copyright. But these are like an airport briefing guide. Who's compiled all that information? Is it internal?
So it's internal, indeed. Usually, every operator has a department that will be able to manage these jungle jets. So typically, what we would do is we would do or ask the operator to do an airfield assessment. So they would fly to the location, and then they would have these paper documents, and then they would literally go and do some drawings by hand. Or alternatively, sometimes nowadays they would also take some pictures of the airfield from the cockpit, so cockpit view of the airfield, and then they would also draw pictures if there are obstacles and so on. And the idea is basically to try to recreate an approach that would make sense, and in the humanitarian field. And also there are from time to time zones that you cannot overfly. So on those jungle jets, they would also identify where they would have to approach the airfield from, or if there's a zone that they have to avoid, or even if there's maybe an area where there's a lot of camels, for instance. They may say, hey, camels are usually found in that area, and so on. So basically visual aid to assist the pilots in all these locations where we would potentially ask them to operate to. This is what basically the jungle jets are. But again, it is monitored by the operator, And yes, from time to time, there's definitely a need for them to update those jungle jets. So it's quite important to have this.
You know, as you're speaking, some people might think this is kind of rudimentary, but actually, in the United States, I'm in the U.S., and operators throughout the world have these type of charts for their internal communications. Other than the approaches, yours goes a little bit further into some of the warning areas. But even some operators that are commercially operating, you know, the big airlines, they use these type of charts themselves. They come up with these type of things themselves. So this is not just specific to your type of flying, but the thing that is specific, and what I gleaned from this when you said that, is some of those really important things like you talked about that's available to us as a commercial operator that may not be available to you, like overflying airspace that you were talking about that might be an issue. So that is something that's really interesting. So tell me a little bit about this operation and the number of aircraft and all that you talked about. How do you, like, let's talk a little bit about a typical flight, if there is such a thing, from point A to point B.
You know, every mission is quite different. I mean, I would say I could compare that to a pilot doing, standard flying between A to B. They might say it's the same flight every day, but the weather is always going to be different. The number of passengers that you're going to have is going to be different. The cargo that you'll be uplifting is always different. So there's always some particularities in what we do. And in each context where we operate, whether you operate in Mali, in Burkina Faso, or in Somalia, there's some similarities in what we do, but every mission is different. I can give you an idea of a typical mission that we do, and I'm going to use the example, for instance, of Somalia. So in Somalia, we have a contract with two different operators, and we have two different airplanes. So we have a Dash 8 100 with basically a 21 seat configuration, and it can carry roughly about 2.5 to 3 tons of cargo. And then alongside to that, we operate also a Dornier 228, which is a 19-seater aircraft, unpressurized, which flies at lower altitudes. And we use this aircraft for basically fields where the Dash 8 would not be able to land at because it would be, too rugged. There would be stones, or there would be the airstrip would simply be too short, and so on. So those two planes, just to put you into context, for this particular contract, they are based out of Nairobi. Now, in Nairobi in the morning, what we would see is we would have our logistics department. They would basically have brought in cargo the night before to the airport. And that cargo would usually be medical items. So you can think, it could be aspirins, it could be injections, it could be, hand sanitizer, it could be anything that we would need for a field hospital that would be required. We also would be carrying probably some plum peanuts, which is basically those high energy caloric bars that we would give to malnourished people. So those come in boxes. So all of these items would be brought the day before the flight to the airport. And then it would be brought over to the aircraft. And then all of this would be loaded typically in the early hours of the morning, roughly between, I'm going to say, from 6 o'clock in the morning. Typical departures out of Nairobi Jomo Kenyatta would be around 7:30 in the morning. And then we would have passengers. So those passengers would be brought by an ICRC vehicle all the way to the airport. They would check in just like in a regular check-in counter, but they would be given a boarding pass, an ICRC boarding pass. And then they would be going through immigration, because in that case, it's a trans-border flight. They're actually flying to another country. And these passengers, 99% of them would be ICRC employees. So they could be employees that work in the protection department. They maybe are going for a field visit into prisons. We might have medical team members, so doctors, nurses, that are in fact going to be located in an area to provide medical assistance. We could have also what we call WATAB engineers. WATAB stands for Water and Habitation Engineers. So they're the ones basically that would go and look at building a well, for instance, to provide water for a village, or they could be the ones looking at building a new facility, such as a small field hospital in a location. So these people would travel by plane. And then they would fly 2.5 hours from Nairobi all the way to Mogadishu. Mogadishu is usually our first stop. There, they would get off the aircraft, they would go through immigration, and while we were doing this, behind the Dash 8, the Dornier aircraft 228 would also have taken off at the same time. And then both planes would meet up in Mogadishu. And at that point, what would happen is the Dash 8 aircraft, part of its cargo would be offloaded, would probably be kept in a warehouse. And then some of those passengers would probably also transfer onto the Dornier aircraft. And some additional cargo would be loaded onto the Dornier aircraft, whether it would be from the Dash 8 that would have arrived in Mogadishu or from our warehouse that we have in Mogadishu. We also keep a lot of material in a warehouse there. And then some of these passengers would be going onto the smaller aircraft to be able to go to other destinations where, as mentioned earlier, the Dash 8 would not have access to. And then the smaller aircraft would then take the lead. So it would fly from Mogadishu to, destination A, destination B, destination C, and so on. And then it would come back near the end of the day to Mogadishu for custom and clearance purposes, and then it would fly back to Nairobi. As for the Dash 8, once it arrives in Mogadishu, they would offload most of all the cargo, and then they would probably load the cargo hold with additional cargo to other locations inside Somalia that where Dash 8 is capable of landing, and then we would again bring in goods to those locations between 2 to 3 tons. So we always try to optimize the use of the aircraft as much as we can, mainly with cargo. It's very rare that we're able to fit in 21 passengers on every flight segment. But in terms of cargo, of course, we have this desire to be able to bring this to locations where it's most needed. And then from there, we have usually a logistics team that would pick up the cargo, and then by road, they would go and basically bring it to other smaller warehouses alongside the passengers that would have been dropped off in those locations. As mentioned, maybe the WATAB engineers, some of the medical team would go to other locations and so on. So this is typically how we would connect those two aircrafts together and how we would bring in goods into the country. At the end of the day, both planes would basically fly back to Nairobi where they would overnight, and then the next day we would start the same process again.
That's some incredible color on the logistics, also the complexity of this operation, which I didn't even realize was so complex. So this takes someone who's very astute in being able to coordinate many things at the same time, like yourself. So this brings to mind, like, how does somebody get involved with this, or how can someone help out if they're like watching or listening right now?
Well, aviation, we're always a bit doing the last mile for humanitarian aid delivery. Air operations is crucial in some of the contexts where we operate because of security reasons, because of infrastructure reasons. There's no roads. So consequently, mainly in Africa, which is, I would say, 95% of the area where we operate, aviation planes are required for this kind of transport. Now, as you can imagine, and as you know, planes are quite expensive. I mean, annually right now, we're looking at a budget of roughly 35 million Swiss francs only for the air asset operations. Of course, it's not a huge sum in the annual budget of the ICRC, but it still represents a considerable amount. ICRC works basically on donations. So we're contrary to commercial operators, we don't have a profit center. We have a cost center. So what we do is we spend money. So we need money to spend this money to be able to bring in those goods. So how could people contribute? People could contribute by going on the ICRC website and donate, basically. All those donations would basically go through the team that is managing all donations. And then, of course, then all the budget would be reallocated differently based on the needs. But I would say this would be probably the best way to assist. It would be to, talk about what we do, That's for first things, but also encourage people, if they believe in our mission, is to go and donate to the ICRC. And then hopefully all these costs would be ventilated through our air operations and we would continue to be able to assist.
And you can find that at icrc.org, icrc.org. And you can find out so much more than what we just talked about today, all the different humanitarian relief and all the other missions of the ICRC, and how you can give. It's real simple. You can go to the website, icrc.org. Laurent, this has been awesome. I mean, learning so much about the air operations. We could go on and talk forever, but a little bit of a fun fact. The aircraft that we see usually in the pictures, they're painted white and usually have like a red cross on them. Who actually puts that painting on the aircraft, and who paints that aircraft when they actually, is it the ACMI?
So, in fact, in most contracts, we want those to be painted, but sometimes there's stickers also.
Ah,
So it would be the operator. So when we get into a contract, we would ask the operator. We have guidelines as to where they have to put those stickers or those paintings. So of course, we need those to be under the wings for visibility purposes. The ICRC has being accepted in several country where disaster is around and insecurity is around. So we have this acceptance from military groups. Now, this acceptance comes from the Red Cross. The Red Cross is basically, what protects us, basically, or identifies us as being ICRC. So we have these guidelines where we get into a contract with the operator. You need to put this Red Cross. They have to be of a certain size. You have to have them under the wings. You have to have them near the windows, near the main door, and so on. And so that is a requirement, a contractual requirement that we have. Now, the plane that you see behind me, it used to be a pilot, in fact, that worked for the ICRC for many years. And this was I believe it's a Let
what's it down here?
it's a Let 410, in fact.
Oh,
It's
wow.
a Let 410 from South Africa. And this is a widely used aircraft that we still have these days. A bit of a working horse, it can carry a lot of people. It's what we call the STOL aircraft, as you know, short takeoff and landing. So great for the type of operations that we do. And the fun fact, maybe I can mention also, is in case people didn't know, but the flag of ICRC is basically also a Red Cross. But the ICRC Red Cross is the opposite colors, basically. So when you look at the ICRC Red Cross, which is a background white with a red cross, well, the flag of Switzerland is actually the opposite, a background which is red with a white cross.
Fascinating, and I'm glad you brought that up because I'm sure someone's going to ask that question. But, Laurent, this has been awesome having you here, and I really appreciate you coming to talk to us about the ICRC and the incredibly important mission of the International Committee of the Red Cross. We can find out more at icrc.org as far as donating and also their mission. Go check out their blog. They're always putting out some really cool stuff out there to talk about their mission throughout the world. But, Laurent, what's next? I mean, what's next for the ICRC or for you, for that matter, as far as moving forward with the mission?
Well, what's next? Where we talk a lot about sustainability in these days. There's a lot of discussions about drone operations, about using also airships for operations. We're not quite there yet, but I think there's a future ahead of us, which will definitely, in the long term, involve UAVs in a non-military way, of course, maybe for cargo operations. We can continue doing airdrops from time to time in areas where it's even difficult to access by helicopter, even by plane. We can't land, so we want to airdrop items. So we're partnering up also with some organizations that have several initiatives in that sense. Flying whales is one that we have a lot of interest on. It's a big Zeppelin airship, basically, which could carry up to 60 tons. So we have a lot of interest of building or enhancing partnerships with these people in the long run. So We can even think about electrical planes, even using SAF, to become a bit more sustainable. Now, Africa is not quite there yet, as it would be for commercial operators in United States. But those are all innovations that we are keeping abreast, we are keeping informed, and at some point, I wouldn't be surprised that in the future, you will start seeing a bit more of these initiatives applied to the humanitarian sector. So it's interesting times for that. Also, in terms of conflict, there's what's going on around the world, that we always have to keep informed about conflicts wherever they take. We may be asked to develop a network of planes, flying from different countries and so on. So it's a very dynamic world. It's very active. There's never, like we like to say, there's never a dull day in air ops. Not every day is different. And so what's next for me? Well, it's keeping basically my ears and eyes open on what's happening around the world, to make sure that we can be there and support humanitarian operations wherever they need to happen.
Well, Laurent, we really appreciate what you do with the ICRC, and it takes somebody with a lot of talent like yourself and a background in aviation like you have. It's many years of experience that you bring to the ICRC, and they're really blessed to have you. And you can find out more, by the way, icrc.org. Laurent, thanks again so much for joining us today. And if you have questions, stuckmicavcast@gmail.com. We'll send them over to Laurent if you want. And the other thing, too, is make sure you go check out our sponsor, and that's aviationcareerspodcast.com. They have courses, coaching, and also scholarships to help you move forward in your aviation career. Laurent, again, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate what you do out there, and stay safe, please.
Thank you. My pleasure, Carl.
You've been listening to the Stuck Mic AvCast. Don't forget to watch us also on YouTube, and go check out the International Committee of the Red Cross, icrc.org. Most importantly, safe flying out there. We'll join you again in the next episode.